Hello and welcome everyone to today's episode. Today we are going to be covering the following topics. All the timestamps are in the description below. And I hope you enjoy today's episode. So let's get started on these topics. In C#, the double data type versus float data type. So let's have a look at storing the pi value and what difference it makes overall. So when you have the pi value, which is this value over here, notice for the float, I am using the suffix f, which f is to indicate to the C# compiler that you're happy to lose the precision of this number as it processes it. So here we are basically going to multiply it by the radius and we're going to get the area. Now for the last operation here, which is area number 3, we are going to use math.pi. This is a built-in constant, and how it stores it internally is using the double data type, and this is the value for it. Then we're just going to write out area 2, and area 3 here. The values that we get out are the following. We can see that area using the double, they match, but area using the float over here doesn't match. This is because float data type is less precise. So what is the actual difference between these? So as you can see here, this is the one from double that we get. So this is the most accurate. And then with the float, we get the following value. The float one is slightly larger, the double one it is. And what's the difference in terms of how large is it? This is the value and this is the difference in percentage. So as you can see, it is less precise than a double, but is it significant enough for it to matter for you? So if you're measuring area, does this percentage actually matter to you? However, when working with money, you need to be aware that this percentage, although it is very low, it still matters, because otherwise the monetary calculations, depending on how large the number is, could be significant. So that's why in this situation, it doesn't matter that much. But if you need to be very precise, then of course, don't use float. One other thing you should be aware of is, so float is the smallest data type, then you have double, and then you have decimal. Notice that the double over here takes up 8 bytes, where this is float's 4 bytes. So if you don't need that much accuracy, then you should definitely use float. But if you're looking for more accuracy into the working out your area, then you should choose double. And you should avoid both of these, float and double, for monetary calculations. Let's understand the difference between a float, a double, and a decimal. So if you notice here, I'm trying to store a decimal number that is quite large. So before the decimal place and after decimal place. So this is quite a large number I'm trying to store. Now notice here that I'm using f to indicate this is float. This is to tell the C# compiler that we're happy with C# converting our number here to a float and using some decimal places. And accuracy or double, we did not need to use any suffix, so no letters are required. This is because double is the default data type in C#. And if you look at the decimal, we are indicating that this is a decimal number by adding the letter M. So here we're just printing with F6. This basically is fixed point showing decimal places. So in this case, 6 decimal places. So here we can see the float loses accuracy here. The original number that we had here has changed. And if you pay attention, it has changed because of rounding errors. And the same issue exists with the double. You can see it can represent a number better than a float, but we still lose the decimal places. And then you have the decimal. Notice how many decimal places there are and how the number looks. When we look at the output over here, you can see it's kept the number exactly as we intended originally. So this shows that the decimal data type is very accurate. And let's have a look at the Microsoft documentation on this. The float is the smallest, then it's double, and it's decimal. Decimal takes up most amount of space versus a double and a float. And the accuracy here for the decimal is the largest versus double's 15 to 17 digits and then float's 6 to 9 digits. So this sort of explains why we've got the results we got over here when we had the original number over here and how that's being translated and grounded due to the data type of float, double, and decimal. So I hope this will explain to you when differences can occur between float, double, and decimal. In C# you have the char data type and string data type. What's the difference between them? Char only allow one character at a time, and you must use single quotes as shown here to assign your character. String, on the other hand, allows for multiple characters to be assigned. So a string is basically an array of characters. So that's why with a string, you can actually access the individual letters using the array indexing method here. But what you can't do is inject any of the array elements as shown here. Because if I uncomment this slide, you will see the compiler complains to say that it is read-only. That means strings, once they are assigned, are immutable. They cannot be mutated. So whenever you assign a new string, and now we are assigning the word hello with a lowercase h, this is a different string. And that is fine because that's stored elsewhere in the memory. And the other fact that you need to be aware of is char is actually a value type in C#. So this one is a value type, while a string is an object. Value types are stored on the stack, while objects are stored on the heap. Only references to the objects are stored on the stack. So this is an important difference. Char is a value type and string is an object and a reference type. So I hope this quickly clarifies the difference between char and string. Char, as we said before, is just a single character. String is multiple characters in an array. But you cannot do this, which is change them, but you can change the entire string and assign it a new string. But you cannot change individual characters. So that you can see here, declaring the variable greeting, and then I'm giving it a value of hello, and then I am printing this value. But later on, I'm changing this value to hello with a lowercase h. So this is different to that. And then I'm writing out the output. So if we run this program and see what we get as the output. So if I go here, click on run, and as you can see here, we've got string hello with a uppercase h, and we've got string hello with a lowercase. So how does C# actually do this? So behind the scenes, what happens is, so C# has two ways of storing variables in your computer's memory. One, which is stack, and the other one is called the heap. Stack is used for all the variables that are of value type. So that means integers, char, bit type, and so on. But with strings, because they are objects, they are stored on the heap. And all that gets stored on the stack is the address pointing to the location on the heap. So here we have location 1. So as you can see, this address over here is pointing to this location. But when we change the word hello to hello here, what happens is C# disconnects the line and the address over here. So it forgets about that one and says, address 1, I don't need to worry about that one. Instead, I'm going to use address 8, which has the new string. So going back to the code, when we allocated hello lowercase here, C# removed the reference to address 1 and instead changed the reference to address 8 here, which has the new string. So that is why string is known as a reference type, while other variables are actually stored directly on the stack over here, and they are not stored on the heap. And you might be wondering what happens to the word hello at address location 1 now that we are using location 8. If there are no longer anything that is referencing hello value here, then C# garbage collection as part of the CLR runtime of .NET, it will come clean up this memory address here. So you don't have to manually clean up your heap. The CLR runtime garbage collection process will do it for you. So it will go, this string over here, we don't need it, so I'm going to remove it completely from the memory. And the same would happen again if you were to change the value here to something else. It would get stored in the next memory address, and then the address here would change to, for example, 9, and so on. And the old value will eventually get removed by the garbage collection process. In this video, I'm going to discuss the Bool type and the features you might not know about the Bool type. But you need to understand that it normally has two states, which is true and false. By adding a question mark here, you can give it a third state. And what is that third state? It is a null state. So here, as you can see, we assigned a value of null. So why would you want a null? So let's say you have an email subscription for your users. So you can have the user verifying their email address, not verifying their email address, or they haven't responded. So if they haven't responded, you would say it's null. We don't know whether their email had been verified by entering the correct code. Not entering the correct code means they've failed the verification. But by simply not responding, that would be a null. So that's where you would use the third state. And you can then declare that by using the question mark. So you use the keyword bool as the data type and then question mark, and this allows for the nulls. Now if I take out the question mark, you can see that I can't assign the null over here, and this is the reason given for it. So if I add the question mark back in, and then you can check has value. So has value is very important because it lets you know if it actually is not null. So here we're checking does it have value. Normally that would say true. If it have the value, that means a value of true or a value of false. So in this instance, we're saying it doesn't have a value. So have value is true, but we want the opposite of that. So we use the exclamation mark to turn the true into a false. So then we don't know, for example, whether the user has verified the email address at that point, yes or no. They haven't simply responded to it. And then you can check if it does have a value, then what is that value? and notice you are using is equal true. So here we are saying this task is done. But what you can do is you can simplify this code, and by simply deleting this here, and that would give you a true value. So if it's true, then this code would run. Otherwise, it would be false value, and this line would get executed. So you don't have to use equal true, because by default, when the if condition looks at it, this returns true, and when that true is found out, then automatically this line gets executed. So you don't really need equal true. Another way of using null coalescing operator. So here, as you can see, I'm saying is done. So adding, did it have a value or not? Now here, if it has a value, then it will use its actual value. But if it is null, then by default, we're using false. This variable has null in it, then we want false to be the default value. So that's why you use question mark, which is known as the null coalescing operator. So if it doesn't have value, then by default, that value will be false. Or if we want the value to be true, if we find the null in this variable, then change that to a true. But in this instance, we're going to have the default value as false. So if the user has not responded to the email verification, we just assume that it's a fail. So we're just going to say it's false. So that's why you use the question mark operator here, which is null coalescing operator. But you can make it interesting by adding the question mark for null, and then you can use the has value to actually detect that they have a valid value, and then you can use the coalescing operator here. In C# you cannot concatenate two char types like this. This would be wrong, and the compiler will not let you do it. This is because, first of all, char data types can only hold one character, and you can see the compiler complaints to say cannot implicitly convert type into char. And you might say, I didn't say this as an int. So this value here behind the scenes is actually stored as an integer. The reason it's stored as integer, it's because it represents Unicode values for A and B. This is one way you could do it, which is store it as an integer in terms of the results that we get, and then you can do C1 plus C2, and this adds the Unicode values for those, and then you get C3. But when you do this, you do not get the output that you desire. So if I run this code here, so as you can see here, we had the values A and B, and those are shown in the output here. But when you look at the output of this line over here, which is over here, you can see that we've got the value A with an accent mark, which is not the desired output that we wanted. How do you properly do this? So you convert the char data type to string like this using the toString method over here, and this is built into C#, and then you can concatenate the output like this, or you can concatenate the output like this. So here we are using string interpolation. So notice the dollar sign, which allows us to make text fit variables. So C1, C2. Now, which one of these method is better? So the toString, of course, is always the better method of doing it. This method, although it's easier on the eye, that is the more efficient method. But if you have lots of strings to concatenate, this one might be an option. My recommendation is to stick with the toString option. And as you can see, the output we do get for both of these over here is A and B, which is what we intended to do before. And of course, this sort of problem does not exist with strings, because strings are not value types. They are not stored as integers. They're actually stored as reference or object types. So here, concatenating these two, the compiler knows what to do. So it will go and grab the value of S1 and S2, and it will concatenate and join them together. So here you can see when we write the output, and you can see we have the desired output, which is AB, the result of doing the following operations on it. So I hope this makes sense around char types and what you can and what you can't do with them, and how do you do them properly with the toString method or using the string interpolation. Let's understand namespaces in .NET. So here I have a program in C#, and as you can see here, I'm creating a namespace called animals. So what is a namespace? Namespace is a way for you to group your code that makes logical sense. So here you can see I'm creating a namespace called animal. So this animals namespace has a class called dog in it, and you can imagine it can have other things like hat, cow, and so on. So here this dog class has a method called bark. So you can see the namespace is animals, and you have a class called dog, and then you have a method called bark. So in order to create this class, so if you want an instance of a dog, what you would need to do is use the dog as the class type or the data type that you want. So creating a copy of the class. So you have the blueprint at the top. Now we're just creating a copy. Now notice here that I have just used dog without any reference to animals. This is because of this. this. So I am using the using animals statement at the top. This makes the dog class available in my code. So if I take out this namespace here, and now if I scroll down, you will see that I suddenly have an error to say it cannot find a data type of dog. And this is because it's in a namespace. So how do I get around it? So one way I could do is use the method as shown here. So you can see I have vehicles.car. So I could use animals.dog. And then I can use animals.dog here as well. And now you can see that this code works and there are no errors, but it makes my code longer than necessary. I need to do more typing. So a shortcut is you delete this, and instead what you do is you add using animals at the top. So by using animals, so then you don't need to have animals here or over here. So let's have a look at another one. So I've got vehicles. So you can see vehicles par, and then it has a honk method. So notice again the structure, namespace there, and a class within it, and then a method within the class. And if we look at how do we do this, so I've gone with the longer method here, which is vehicles.car and new vehicles.car over here. This is because there is no namespace here for using pars. So here, what I'm going to do is if I remove vehicles from here, and you can see I suddenly have an error message here and an error message here. And if I hover over the error message, it says the type or namespace name car could not be found. If I add using vehicles, then you can see if I hover over it, this is a namespace because it had recognized that there is a namespace called vehicles within my code. And now you can see the error has gone from here, and it correctly identifies that this is a class coming from vehicles.car. There are more to learn on namespaces, but for now, this gave you a good introduction to what they are. We'll talk about other namespaces such as the system one at some other point. With namespaces, common question I get asked is, why do I have to use using vehicle and using animals here if the namespace exists in the same file? So for example, you can see namespace animals and namespace vehicles. And then within the same file, I also have the class for my program and the main method. So why is it that you have to use using animals and using vehicles there? If I remove these two references, so as you can see, I have now commented out the two namespaces. They're still here. This is their definition. But if I scroll down, you can see suddenly I have an error to say the type or the namespace dog could not be found. And the same thing happened with the car. So why do you get the error here, 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 and here? Why do we have these errors? This is because the way the C# compiler sees these classes. So as you can see, we have core.class dog, and it's within the animals namespace. What the C# compiler sees, this class, it actually sees it as animals.dog. That's how the C# compiler sees this. And the same with this one, vehicles.car. So that's how the C# compiler sees it. To us, we don't see it like that. We see it as a bit of a folder structure. So this is the main folder, and within here, the dog. And then same, the root of the folder, you can see that we have the namespace vehicles and we have the namespace animals. And in the same namespace, we also have our program. So why is it that this didn't work? Like I said, C# doesn't see it as just dog. It's actually looking for vehicles.car, and you can see the error goes away. And if I put vehicles.car here as well, you can see the error has gone away. And if I look at this one, again, it's animals. So notice here that I have typed animals.dog and the error has gone away, while here the error remains because it cannot find dog. So what it's looking for is animals.dog. So here the error goes away by just simply qualifying the class name fully, because internally that's how C# is seeing this class. So that we are seeing it in a different light, it is seeing it as fully qualified name. So it cannot find a class name just called dog. It actually is fully qualified. It needs to look for animals.dog. So that's why when you have this over here and you remove the fully qualified name, C# is looking for you to provide it. What do you mean by dog? So here, when you use the using statement here with animals, using animals, it knows that that's the beginning or the namespace prefix to add to the class, and then it will look for animals.dog. And that's why it's able to figure it out. Behind the scenes, it will actually replace it with animals.dog. That's what the fully qualified class name is, not just dog. So I hope this makes sense in terms of the namespaces and why you need to use the using statement. And if you're not using the using statement, why you need to fully qualify the class name for it to work. .NET, there is a concept of implicit namespaces. And what do I mean by that? So let's have a look at this line over here, console.writeLine. We know that this comes from a namespace called system, and you can see using system to bring that namespace in. So I don't have to write system.console. So I don't have to write it like this. Instead, I can just use the using statements. If I take this out over here, and if we have a look at the statement over here, which is using system, and you can see we are getting no errors because we're using the statement there. But if I take this statement out, you can see that I still don't get any error messages here. And if I were to run the program, so if I go here and run, and you can see it successfully compiles and runs the program. So there is the output that we expected, and there are no errors. So why is it that I have commented out the line over here, but yet this still works, even though it's in the system namespace? This is because of something called implicit usings within .NET. So if we have a look at the project file, so if I go to Explorer, and then if we have a look at, so I am in project 1 over here, and this is my project 1 here. So I want to access the project file, CS project file for my project 1. So if I click onto there, now here's something very important. So over here, you can see there is implicit usings, and currently this is enabled. So if I were to disable this, so now you can see I have added the word disable here for the implicit usings over here. So now if we go back to our project, so I have now saved this here. Now if I go back to my project, you can see that it says console does not exist in the current context, so I cannot find it. So I can do is system.console to make the error go away. So that's why when I commented this line out before over here, this worked. This is because I had this implicit using over here as enabled, but now I've disabled it. We get this error message over here. So now I can add the usings here, and you can see that's now a valid line, and this now works, and there are no errors. And again, I can comment this out over here and then change that to enabled. Now this has been enabled for implicit usings over here, and now if I go back over here, you can see that I still get the error. This is because I haven't saved the file. So you can see the indicator here that I haven't saved it. So if I press Ctrl S to save this, and you can see the error now goes away because that namespace works. But the implicit namespaces do not always work. But if I try and do this one, which comes from the JSON namespace, so notice here the line is commented out, and I'm getting an error here, even though the implicit usings is enabled. This is because for console application, JSON is unfortunately not one of those namespaces that Microsoft has decided to implicitly enable within your project. So for each different type of project, I'm using a console application project. The JSON namespace here is not enabled. So in order for that to work, I do actually have to use a using statement. And now you can see the error has gone away because this line has now been enabled. So which namespaces are actually automatically brought into a console application? So the namespaces that are brought into the console application are the following. So you've got the systems, generics, IO, link, HTTP, threading, and tasks. These all are the ones for the console application that are automatically brought in. Notice that the JSON one is not, though this is different depending on the template that you're using. So if you are getting a weird error like this, where you actually, for example, are using a namespace that is not automatically brought in, it's not implicit, then you need to make sure you manually bring that in using the syntax. But if you're finding that actually, even though you've commented out a namespace like here, but the line still works, this is because of the implicit usings setting within your project have been enabled. So I hope this solves the mystery of implicit namespaces in .NET and in C# for your console application.